Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. It's Monday, January 16th, and I'm your host, Cara Santa Maria. I want to thank those of you out the gate who have supported Talk Nerdy this week, including those who have pledged to be patrons of the show at patreon.com/talknerdy. That list includes Mark Hepburn, Phil T-Bear, Timothy Glover, Christian Jeffrey, David Lacer, Jeffrey Perez, Pedro M. Rosario Barbosa, Stuart Ogg, The Honorable Husband, Charles Payette, Jafe, Gabriel Felipe Jaramillo Gonzalez, Brian Holden, and last but not least, Jeffrey Sewell. That list is getting long, and there are hundreds more of you who have pledged under the level where I call your name out on the air. So thank you all from the bottom of my heart. Remember, you can support the show in many ways by rating and reviewing on iTunes or whatever feed catcher you use, by spreading the word on social media, or by visiting carasantamaria.com, shopping in the Talk Nerdy store, or pledging your support. Guys, this week, it's a great episode. I had the honor to be able to watch a new film. It'll be coming out online. It'll be available starting January 20th. It's called A Plastic Ocean, and it does an incredible job showing the real problem that is plastic in our waterways and all of the downstream effects of that. This week, I get to chat with Jo Ruxton. She's a producer of the film A Plastic Ocean, but she's also the director of education for the foundation that goes along with it, Plastic Oceans. You can learn more about it at plasticoceans.org. She's got an incredible background in production, working for Blue Planet, and doing a lot of kind of filming underwater. But now she's the co-founder of Plastic Oceans Foundation. Like I said, she produced the incredible film A Plastic Ocean. And she does a lot of great work helping people understand just what a problem plastic in our waters has become. So, I'll let her say it for herself because she is incredibly eloquent, and I just learned an awful lot chatting with her. So without any further ado, here she is, Jo Ruxton. Jo, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
So we are talking from across the pond. Are you in London?
No, I'm closer to Bristol in the west.
Oh, very cool. But it's the same time zone, isn't it?
Oh, yes. We only have one time zone.
Must be nice. It's always a bit confusing here in the States because there's 4 time zones, and there's one state that doesn't seem to want to use daylight savings. But yeah, I'm in Los Angeles, so we're chatting at midnight my time, 8 a.m. your time, which is perfect for me because I'm a night owl. I hope you're an early morning type.
I'm not, but actually this isn't too early, so I'm fine.
Oh, good. So, obviously you've probably had to put in a lot of late nights, a lot of early mornings working on this beautiful film that I was lucky enough to be able to have a kind of sneak peek of ahead of its release. It's called A Plastic Ocean, and it really is about that, about the vast amounts of plastic that are in all of our oceans right now. What made you, first interested in telling this story and producing a documentary of this nature?
Well, I've always had a very deep connection with the ocean. Deep connection. There you are. There's a pun for you. I'm a very keen diver. I studied marine sciences when I was at university, and through my childhood, I've traveled a lot. My father was in the Royal Air Force, so we've lived in some wonderful places, and the sea has always played a big role in that. I worked for many years in Hong Kong, in Asia, for the World Wildlife Fund, and was setting up a marine program for them. So it's always been something I've been interested in. I then worked for the BBC for 12 years. The first series, I was part of the production team for The Blue Planet, which depicted our oceans as being full of life and absolutely pristine. Mm-hmm. But of course, in reality, it wasn't like that. And that didn't always sit comfortably with me because although I wanted people to love the oceans and appreciate what we have, there was nothing in it that gave any hint that actually our oceans are in trouble. So when I left the BBC, it was a case of combining both careers, my marine conservation one and the filmmaking one. And I kept hearing more and more about this problem. And what in particular I was hearing about was how plastic waste is gathering in the North Pacific Ocean, as I thought then, and that it was being called this Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and it had been described as a giant swirling mass of plastic 10 meters deep, twice the size of Texas, and all of those incredible descriptions. And I thought, well, if that's not a topic for a documentary, what is? And sometime later, I managed to join a research vessel that was heading out there to spend a month doing some work with some scientists and volunteers. And actually, when I got to the area that I'd heard so much about but never seen any pictures of, it became clear why there were no pictures of it, because you don't actually see anything. It's so much worse than that and far more insidious. And that was the first of many problems that I had making this film, because how do you portray something that you can't see until you get down to almost microscopic level? And that became the issue.
It's funny because when I got the screener for the film, I asked my boyfriend if he wanted to watch it with me. So we kind of airplayed it from my phone onto the Apple TV on the big screen. And when it got to the point in the film where you talked about visiting the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, he was like, oh, I read a short story about this once where a boy gets cast off and he finds himself in this patch in the middle of the ocean and he's like floating on a piece of plastic. I'm excited to see, not excited, but like interested to see what it looks like. And just because I had read about it so many times, I was like, oh, you can't see it. But I guess it is a very common misconception that I think people think they're like plastic playground slides and coolers and big chunks of plastic out there, but this is plastic at its most pernicious, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is, and that's a good word for it, and one that I've learned since starting this. We did find larger pieces of plastic. If you put a boat in the water and collected all of them, a small boat, you'd probably have about a bathtub full of things. But those had clearly been dumped more recently from shipping, because the pieces that are actually coming from our coast, which is estimated to be 80% of all the plastic in the ocean comes directly from the land, those are the ones that start to break up because they become very brittle with the effect of sunlight and salt and wave action and so on. And they're the ones that break up. And the things that we were finding were rather typical of things from shipping.
Yeah, it seems like because there's this big kind of gyre, this big swirling sort of current in the middle of the ocean, a lot of things end up in this one place, and that's just because of the way that the oceans sort of go. And when they're traveling so incredibly far from all of our refuse, from all of our runoff, and like you said, bombarding into other things, being ripped to shreds, being made brittle from the sun, brittle from the high salt concentration, this plastic no longer really looks like plastic. What it looks like to most of the wildlife out there is plankton.
Plankton, exactly, yes. Yes, and that really is the heart of the issue, because everything depends ultimately on the plankton in the marine system. So getting right into the heart of the food chain is the worst possible problem. And of course, that's not the only thing. And what I was learning when I was on this ship, because there was plenty of time to talk to scientists, is that plastic, once it's in the ocean, it starts to attract chemicals that are there from decades of agricultural and industrial runoff, and even chemicals that have been banned, like DDT, are still out there, and they don't like water. They're hydrophobic. And it just so happens that the thing they're attracted to very, very rapidly is plastic. And they hitchhike on it. So anything that's eating these pieces that have been there a long time, they've had a long time to attract these chemicals. And what happens is, once it gets into the digestive system of a fish, something with a fatty system, what they like better than plastic is fat. So they're actually released and they get stored in those fatty tissues. So the further up the food chain you are, the higher dosage you're getting of these chemicals. And these have been linked to all kinds of conditions that we hear more and more about now, such as cancer, autoimmune problems, behavioral problems, cognitive developmental problems, and infertility.
Gosh. And so it's kind of this insult to injury situation. I think trying to imagine what it must be like for a small kind of marine organism swimming around thinking that it's seeing a nice meal and ingesting a lot of plastic, as if it weren't bad enough that it's eating this like non-nutritive substance and not actually getting the nutrition that it needs. On top of that, this non-nutritive substance is like chelating toxic chemicals. And
Yes.
and like you said, I think a lot of people don't realize that the higher up the food chain you go, the higher the concentration of these toxins that you're exposed to. So when you get to the point of like a human being or like a large mammal like a bear, that might eat fish, you're getting like way heavier exposure. So gosh, we already have to worry about the heavy metals in the fish in the sea. We also have to worry about these different toxins. What kinds of chemicals are we talking about here?
The one that we hear most about are the phthalates. One of the ones that you've probably heard or is commonly known is BPA, which is in plastics.
Yeah, you see that a lot on plastic bottles now. It's BPA free, like it's a selling point.
Yeah, but then as you'll have seen in the film, that's just one thing that's been removed, and there's so many more that haven't been removed, because that's the other thing about plastic. It's not just the chemicals that adsorb to it, in other words, that stick onto it ready to be released. It's the chemicals that are in the plastic that leach from it. So it's a two-way thing.
Ugh. And we think about plastic. When did plastic ballpark? I mean, I don't want to have to quiz you, but when did plastic kind of first come into being? It was kind of in the mid-century, right?
It was 150 years ago.
Wow, it was that long ago?
It was, but the whole idea of plastic being disposable was in the mid-50s. And that really is the heart of this whole problem. I mean, the fact that we were told, and we still believe, that something that's indestructible could be disposable, it's just inconceivable now that we thought that. Where did we think it was going to go?
I know, and I think that it's still kind of the thought process for many people.
Because it is.
Those of us who are lucky enough to live in an industrialized nation, who don't have to like live where our garbage is, we're able to put it in a bin, walk away from it, and never see it again. It's like so out of sight, out of mind.
Yes. And that's the whole thing, the out of sight, out of mind. And those that are in areas where they don't have the infrastructure to deal with it are growing up with it. It's normal. And that is so sad for so many reasons.
Yeah. And there's only so many different ways that you can use it. I think that we talk about reduce, reuse, recycle. I mean, that's a mantra that I heard when I was in kindergarten. Like there was already a growing understanding, and I'm in my 30s, but there's already a growing understanding of the fact that we need to be mindful of these things and we need to be shepherding our planet better than we had in the past. But even then, you can reuse certain plastics, you can recycle certain plastics, but many plastics are made to only be used once.
Yes, half of all plastics that are made are for single use, which is incredible, particularly when you think we're now making more than 300 million tons every year. So year on year on year, we're doing that. And I'll give you another statistic, which my colleague had worked out, which I find really quite frightening. He worked out how much the global production of plastic was around about the time he was born, and the closest he could get was 1961. And in 1961, global production of plastic was 8 million tons. Well, now it's 300 million tons, and 8 million tons is estimated to go into the oceans every year. So you think if we carry on producing it exponentially as we are now, how much is going to be going into the ocean in another 50 years if we don't stop this now? It's tipping point. We've got to stop. We've got to stop believing that plastic's disposable. Once you get that concept into your head, there's so many changes you can make in your own life that will make all the difference.
It's true, and I want to make sure that we spend some time really talking about the things that we can do to help feel more empowered and to help at least take control of our own consumption. But before we get into that, I mean, I struggle sometimes with the cynicism of worrying that what I'm doing, because I am, pretty mindful person. I drive an electric car, and I'm really mindful about refusing single-use plastic. And I live in Los Angeles, where we have, single-use bags are banned, and the city itself is pretty mindful, which makes me feel quite good. But that said, there are still a lot of problems with a lack of legislation. I worry sometimes, like, how much can we each do as an individual if there's no political will to stop it? Because I'm still guilty. If I'm on a road trip and I stop at a convenience store and I'm thirsty, I may buy a plastic bottle of water, because it's, in my view, or at least in my convenience, the only option available to me. There is no water in a glass bottle that I can purchase.
Yes, that is something, but really you've got to think, what did we do before we could buy bottled water?
Yeah.
And I always take my own bottle with me, and I've just got into the habit. I don't go anywhere without it now. And if you were doing long car journeys as kids, I mean, I remember we always had a thermos flask of tea and water for us. I remember we'd stop in the car and we'd stop and have our tea, and there's no reason why we can't go back to that sort of thing. I mean, there's an awful lot of really rather nice bottles if you want to spend a bit of money on it and treasure it, and always make sure you've got it with you. Or there are many, many different types of bottles we can take with us. It's just this habit. We know that if we forget, there's going to be something there.
It's so true. And it's funny you mentioned going on the car trips with your family when you were young and just always having a thermos. So much of this, I think,
Mm.
is kind of impressed upon us when we're children. So many of our habits can really be made, like, as I think, I'm not a parent, but I'm kind of the age where many of my friends are starting to have children. And I think about how much our own behavior can impress upon our children and really make good habits for the future.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I raised my children in Hong Kong, where in the summer it's very hot. We never went that far in the car because you can't drive too far unless you're stuck in a traffic jam.
Mhm.
But we couldn't buy bottled water then when they were growing up. I mean, they're now in their 30s. So we always had to think about taking something with us. And if we were going out on a boat or something, we always made sure that we had plenty of drinks, because you had to when it was so hot. And bottled water never came into the equation. And we managed, and they grew up and they're very healthy.
Yeah, you know what? When I was watching the film, kind of I guess it was like a dual hosted or dual narrated film, and there's a free diver named Tanya Streeter. Am I pronouncing her name right?
Absolutely. World champion freediver, Tanya.
World champ. Yeah, she's incredible. And she's,
Mm.
obviously very passionate about this issue. And she kind of makes a funny comment about how, she rides her husband about it, and it's hard. It's very much against what's normal to be
Mm.
really mindful of these single-use plastics. And she's like, I know I'm doing well when I see him rinsing out his Ziploc bags. And it is
Yes.
kind of funny to think about doing that, but why don't we do that?
Well, it's interesting you should say about the bags. I remember my mother hanging plastic bags on the washing line that she'd washed out. And it was kind of I guess, the wartime mindset where everything was
Mhm.
used and reused. And I used to say, oh, Mum, everyone gives you plastic bags now. And I really think back to that time. What was I talking about? She had it right. They had it right
Yeah.
then.
It's true. And those are the things that I think are so tough. It's the plastic bottles, the plastic bags, the things that are easy
Mm.
enough to change, but and would make such a huge impact. But there are also things that I think a lot of people don't think about. Um, Packaging, just containers of the everyday
Oh,
things that we use.
don't get me
Ta-
started.
I know, tampon applicators. Like, how
Yes.
many tampon applicators have I thrown in the trash over the years? Or the micro beads.
Oh, yes,
That's just
microbeads.
horrible.
People are at least getting onto that. And that's actually an interesting one, because once people understand about this, the majority of people are responsible. And when they hear that these are plastic, it's, what, they're plastic? You're kidding me. It's just a case of we didn't know, now we do. And in the case of the politicians, it's now we know, now we'll legislate. But so much of this is a case of, if people don't know, how can they do anything about it? And I give a lot of talks publicly to schools and all sorts of groups. And once you start to show people, it's like a light goes on. It's suddenly, gosh, of course. What have we been thinking all these years? And that to me is almost the easiest part of this. Get people to understand, and then they will want to change, because who wants all this in the environment? Who wants to think that their seafood has got chemicals that have been transported by plastic? Or if you're eating shellfish, if it's mussels and things you're eating that too, and who wants to?
Yeah, it's funny because I think the reason it continues is, you're right, people are in the dark. When you are
Yes.
faced with the effects, if every time you bought a bottle of water in a plastic bottle and you were faced with, if you had to watch a video of what happens downstream from purchasing that bottle before you purchased it, you wouldn't do it.
No, of course
You
not.
wouldn't, if you saw a quick clip of this documentary every time
Yes.
you went to, you said, yeah, I'll take it in a plastic bag. You just wouldn't do it. You would refuse it. You'd go, oh no, I can carry this without the bag. It's fine. I'll just put it in my purse, or I'll use that
Yeah,
reusable
absolutely.
bag that's, in my purse. It's,
Yes.
I'm looking at the website, and I'm seeing that, the film A Plastic Ocean is just, I shouldn't say just one, because it's an incredible film and it's so well done. I'm really excited for people to see it. By the way, when does it open?
It'll be available online from the 20th.
From January 20th. That's exciting. So it's very soon. But I'm
You can
looking
pre-order
on.
it now.
Oh, you
If you go to
can.
the
Great.
website. Yes, you can. Yes.
So you can be ready for it. But
Absolutely.
I'm seeing under Who We Are that you're titled as the director of education, and that's really for the entire initiative, isn't it?
Yes. Now, I had never intended, when I started doing this film, to set up a foundation. For me, it was going to be something that would go on television, within a few months, and that was it, done and dusted, on to the next one. But as I started to learn more and more about this topic, I thought this cannot end with a documentary that goes out and maybe people talk about it and maybe not, and that's it. I realized that this is far more important than that. And so there were two reasons to set up the foundation. One was to help raise funds to make the film, because that's another story in itself.
Of
And
course.
because I wanted the legacy of the film to continue. And what we're doing now is building our education program and building materials that will go easily into a school timetable and fit with the subjects that the kids already have to learn. And that's our purpose now. And we're wanting this to be a global thing. We're talking to schools in different to teachers in different countries, and to examination boards in different countries, and making materials that will be downloadable for students and for teachers, but not just things for extracurricular activities or science clubs. These will be something that will be part of the normal topics that those children have to learn. Because I honestly believe, if people are informed, that we can turn this around in a generation. And that's one of the reasons I've not given up when it became very hard to keep going.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important that you're doing this globally, that you're not just focusing on, developed nations, or you're not just focusing on European nations or American, the Americas, that it really has to be across the world, because plastic has gotten to be so inexpensive that it's not
Yes.
just kind of a privileged problem anymore. It's a problem for
Gosh,
everyone.
it really isn't. Absolutely, it is a problem for everyone. And the schools that I've personally talked to have been in many different countries, and kids from very different backgrounds. It's the whole range. It's kids from underprivileged areas and troubled areas, right through to the very posh private schools. But it's the same. All of them get it. All of them want to do something. It's amazing, because I've given various lectures over time when I've been invited to speak at schools. But this one, it's completely universal. Everyone realizes there's a problem and doesn't really know what to do about it, but they have no idea of the extent of the problem. But once they see it, they get it. And I always say to the children when I start, you are the most important people on the planet right now. I'm already a grandmother. I'm not going to see this through, but I'm going to give you all the information you need to make changes in your lifetimes with your family and your friends. And this is something you can do. And it's kind of like, oh, we're being told we're important. And it just gets to them. It really does. And there's, they're so enthusiastic. It's lovely.
I want to take a quick break to thank this week's sponsors. All right, let's get back to the show. And unfortunately, the sad truth, which I think is also quite ironic, is that the kids who live in some of the poorest parts of the world, and oftentimes these are in kind of coastal areas, are the kids who actually have to deal with this more in their faces. I think they're dealing with the effects of climate change sooner than everyone else, and they're dealing with the effects of this horrific plastic problem because they're so reliant on seafood as a food source, and because they're living oftentimes in places where the beaches are just awash with garbage. Their seabirds are packed full of garbage. In the film, you guys visited a beach that should have been pristine.
Yes.
There was no reason that the beach would have had any garbage because it was there were no shipping ports there. It was kind of off limits from some of the activities that could have potentially added garbage to the beach, yet it was one of the dirtiest places that you'd seen.
Yes, and that's also a two-way stream, actually. I think you're probably talking about Tuvalu, but also we were filming with with children in the Philippines.
Yes,
and it's worse than that, because what happens is we put our stuff in the recycling, but it doesn't always end up being recycled locally, and a lot of it is shipped over to these developing countries, not necessarily the small island nations, obviously, but when it gets there, they don't want all of it. They want the more valuable stuff, which is usually the PET, and it probably is about 10% of what we send over. Now, the real problem is there's no infrastructure to deal with it. There's nobody to collect and sort it and take it away and properly recycle it. And without that, the quickest way to get it away from wherever they are is to put it into the river systems so that it goes. And the idea is that the seas are vast and that they will take it away. But of course, that's not happening. So it's something that's actually coming from a lot of the developed nations and that we are unwittingly sending there. So that's one of the issues. But in the small island communities, in particular Tuvalu, and that one, I think, well, it gets me every time I watch it, to be honest. I well up watching that sequence.
Oh my gosh, it got me too.
Yes, it's because Tuvalu used to be sustainable, as I'm sure many of these small island nations were. But when they got their independence in 1978 and opened local supermarkets, tiny, tiny ones, they started to import goods from other places, particularly in Asia. And whatever they brought in, whether it was a bag of rice or a packet of biscuits or it was stationery, whatever it was, everything was overpackaged in plastic. And of course, in a tiny place like that, there is nowhere to put it. And they're just living in it, and they burn it and push it to the ends of the islands. There's always bonfires going around their communities. So, of course, they're then breathing in the toxic fumes that are given off when you burn plastic, which is dioxins, which is one of the worst cancer-causing products that could be produced. And they're just breathing it in their small communities. And we did find a high rate of cancer there. Now, as filmmakers, we can't say, yes, that's because they're breathing this in. We don't know, but nobody's done the studies. But you look at it, you know what happens when you burn plastic. The family community we filmed, there were 30 in the family. 6 already had cancer. 2 had died of cancer in the previous 18 months. Now, looking at the way they're living, you kind of start to think, well, could this be because of this lifestyle that, they're drowning in waste and they're burning it?
Yeah, and they weren't just burning it to get rid of it or burning it to stay warm. They were cooking their food over top of it. They were really like standing right over the burning plastic, breathing it in, and it was getting
Well,
all
that was
in the
actually
food.
filmed in Fiji, and
Oh,
certainly
was
they're
it?
all doing that. Yes.
Oh God.
There
So
were
it's
there were two sequences, so it's not just yes, they do it in the islands, yes, but Fiji is a much bigger island, much bigger community,
and
and
they
they
still have to
have
burn the plastic there.
well, they do. I mean, the bottom half, the southern part of Fiji, it rains so much, so they have these cooking huts which are separate to the houses. So they're outside in these little tiny sheds where they're burning all this wood for their fires, but it gets very damp, and so as a matter of course, they melt the plastic bags onto it. And yes, it's just that standing there and hailing it all.
Ugh. It's just, I mean, it seems crazy to us, but at the same time, that's because we are living in a nation that's wealthy enough that we have the
Mm,
privilege of putting it in a bin and
we
forgetting
don't think
about
about
it.
it, no,
Yeah.
no, and we need
A-
to start thinking about it.
But the crazy thing is, I mean, let's say that we made extraordinary changes
Mm.
and hopefully we can, hopefully we will, the political will be there. And I do think that we're starting to see like more rapid fire change with legislation
Absolutely,
across the
no, I
world.
agree.
And that's,
Yeah,
yeah, it's really, really promising. But let's say that we got rid of all single use plastic and we only had reusable plastic available. Even then, that's so much plastic. Like, because plastic never goes away. What do we do with all the plastic that's been made over the 150 past years?
well, there's certainly ways to recycle it and turn it into cleaner energy.
Hmm.
But what I don't want you to think is that I'm anti-plastic. I'm not. If you look around, I'm just looking at the worktops in my house here. They look like wood. They're not. They'll have been made from plastic. So we're cutting down an awful lot less trees. If you think turtles were used to make glasses frames and hair combs and things like that, and the shellac beetle was used for gramophone records. And if vinyl hadn't been developed, they would have probably gone extinct. So
Yeah.
plastic has actually done nature a lot of favors. And certainly in medicine, it's very much responsible for the way infection has been kept down. I mean, two of my granddaughters were born very prematurely. And I think without plastic, the chances of them recovering and developing may have been, well, much lower. And, looking at them
Sure.
in the incubator with these tubes going in and out of them they were changed and cleaned. In that case, I think single-use plastic really does have a place. But it's things like we used to buy butter wrapped in wax paper. I've gone back to that now because, you're picking it up in these tubs and throwing the tubs away at the end. And that's
Hmm.
totally not necessary. I've gone back to using solid soap now. It lasts so much longer as well. So I don't have to pump it out of a little plastic bottle that I'm going to go and, keep replacing every time I go out shopping because it runs out within a few weeks. Well, 2 or 3 weeks and it's gone.
Yeah.
So little changes like that. But yes, plastic isn't a bad product. It's light, it's cheap, and very, very versatile. It is the single use that I have the issue with.
Yeah, it's I think it's one in a long line of kind of pieces of evidence that we historically didn't really have the foresight. And I don't know if I'm using kind of the royal we here, but especially here in the States, but I think globally as well. But the States can take their fair share of blame for. I compare this, I mostly work in science journalism, and I was just having a conversation recently on another podcast that I do, The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, about space junk and about all of the garbage that's basically orbiting Earth right now and how incredibly dangerous it has become
Yes.
for our satellites and for space travel. And it kind of has a similar a parallel story with plastic, except to a much less degree, in that every time there's a collision with space junk, it breaks off into smaller pieces and actually causes more space junk and more debris, and the problem becomes worse. And now, of course, we're thinking, how do we go up there and clean up all of this junk because it's really become a problem? Well, shouldn't we have thought of the cleanup when we were first launching the satellites? Shouldn't we have made a contingency for how to take them back down? And this really reminds me of that. It's like, why when we make something so easy, do we not think, maybe this is a little too easy?
Yeah, that baffles me. I really don't understand why we do it. And also, when we started to see problems, why didn't we stop then and start to address it? Why do we wait until we're in the situation we're in now, where, to use your word, pernicious, that's what's happened. You cannot go anywhere without it. And we're not even, so far you and I haven't discussed the deep ocean. It's estimated that 60% of the plastic goes to the bottom of the sea. Now, when we were filming our submersible shoot, we had all sorts of problems with the weather. We were supposed to be going out for 3 days to known debris fields where the scientists had shown that because of the topography of the seabed and the currents on the sea floor, they knew areas that were really, really bad. So we needed to get out there. But when the weather was so bad, we ended up with 1 day, and it was only safe for us to take the sub to a certain position, a certain place where we could get a certain depth. And we had no idea if we would find plastic there, which at the time was quite worrying. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, I don't want to see plastic. But on the other hand, if I don't, we've got this really expensive shoot going on and nothing to show for it. But of course, as soon as the picture started coming back to us, we could see the plastic that they were seeing, which actually made that a stronger sequence to me, because it was just showing, even if you go randomly to the sea floor, you're going to find it. And if you talk to the submersible pilots, they are seeing it all the time. And we don't, there's so little that we know about the deep ocean. And what we do know is that the animals there have a very long life, and that most of them aren't sexually mature until they're about 30. And a lot of the nutrients that come up from the sea floor is so important for the whole marine system. And yet we're destroying it before we even know what we're destroying.
And we don't see that enough. We don't see the footage. We don't, I think it's really striking what you said earlier about working on Blue Planet, because it's true. We're so used to nature documentary that kind of sanitize nature and show it in a pristine form, kind of in an aspirational form. And that's not to say that you can't go out there and get beautiful footage of beautiful, kind of pristine looking places, but you have to be selective in your edits and in your cuts and in what you're willing to show the audience.
And you need time. I mean, you can be out, on a boat for 6 weeks and see nothing. And you're trying to get this sequence, and, you've got a team out there, and it's just not happening. I mean, one of the programs in Blue Planet, the open ocean one, when it was about 3 or 4 months before we were due to go out, and we only had 15 minutes of that program, and we had to fill an hour. And they decided to do one more shoot, and everything happened on that particular shoot. Without that, we probably wouldn't have had that program. And there've been a lot of times when crews have been sent out and just not seeing what they wanted to see.
Yeah, so it's like, not only can you not find the life, but you're also not finding the brilliance anymore, because the coral reefs are sick. And as you said, the ocean floors are covered in detritus, and and it's hard to, yet we still see this presentation, I think, and maybe it is sort of an aspirational view. If we can't understand our world to be beautiful, it's going to be hard for us to want to protect it. But we have to show both sides. Yeah, it's like we've got to see both sides. Otherwise, we're just we're continuing the fantasy. And that's what I worry about. People live in a very sanitized kind of Disney World mentality.
Well, it's interesting. I think people are opening up more now to looking at environmental films. The problem in this business is that people want to be entertained, and they don't want to sit down in the evening and get some punch in the stomach environmental documentary that makes them worry about everything they're doing. And that's why it's very hard to get these commissioned. And I went to a film festival one time here in Bristol, actually, and you go to the commissioners with your ideas, And before we even started, one of them stood up and said, "Don't even come to me with conservation stories, because I can tell you now, I won't even read them." And I thought that
Wow.
was just terrible, because people need to know we are responsible for what we show people. And I think it's time now that we do start to see both sides. But one of the things about this story is that once you get the concept of it, you realize this crazy situation we're in, and we can change it. And often when I'm giving presentations, I start off by showing adverts from the 1950s, when we were being told by our doctors and dentists that smoking was good for us, and that if your baby was crying too much, you would feed it opiates. And we just accepted it. But then, of course, started to understand the problems. And now, every doctor is telling you to give up smoking. It's the first thing that they would do. And of course, people looking at those things find it, quite almost amusing in a tragic sort of way that was the advice we were given. Well, that is exactly the time when we were being told that we could use plastic once and throw it away. You don't have to wash up after yourselves anymore, because you can use these plates and these cups and this cutlery and then just throw it away, and that's it. Job done. And yet that's what we're still doing. And once you look at it that way, people start to think, gosh, absolutely, what were we thinking? And that's the mindset that we've got to change now.
Yeah, it is important. It's interesting you mentioned people want to watch films. They want to be entertained when they watch films. I think people that choose to watch documentaries often are of a mindset that they also want to be informed, maybe a little bit more than pure entertainment. But nobody wants to feel guilty. It's not a good feeling to sit down and to be made to feel guilty. And I think that's something that this film is so brilliant at, is that it didn't make me feel guilty when I watched it. It did make me feel sad a bit for the planet, but it also made me feel quite hopeful that there's so much we can do, and that even though it seems like, oh my God, like hopeless, it's not. This is absolutely a reversible issue if we commit ourselves to it. It almost seems like easier to tackle than climate change. And I hate to say that, and I hate to laugh when I say it, but we talk about climate change so much on my show, and it's so disheartening. And especially with the political climate here in the US and in the UK, a lot of the things that we deal with there. But I feel like we can correct that, and we can make good decisions, but we can absolutely change this plastic bullshit. We can do this.
Yes, absolutely we can. And yes, I use that analogy sometimes because, the climate change issue is happening, and we're all still going to use cars. We're still going to fly. There's, things that you think, well, but that's what our lifestyle's now. I hope that we can turn things around. I mean, you're talking about driving your electric car. I hope that we can turn things around in time, but we're still on a course where the climate is changing and the world is heating up and the oceans are heating up. And, whether we should feel guilty or concerned, perhaps a mix of both, but certainly with our film, I didn't want to point fingers. And one of the issues is with the recent figures are showing that 50% of the plastic is coming from just 5 Asian countries. What last thing I wanted to do was people to sit back and think, oh, well, I'm not one of those 5 Asian countries, I'll just carry on. But we brought it back to the West in the end to show, it's something we're all doing. It's our lifestyles. It's not a single person. It's not one person causing these problems. We're all part of it. And before I started working on this film, I would sometimes take my plastic to the recycling centre because it wasn't being collected. But if I had the bags ready to go and the bin men were outside and I was late for work, I would just grab them and hand them to them, knowing that it was, well, not even thinking actually, but it would have gone to landfill. I wouldn't dream of that now. I just wouldn't dream of it. It's like if I'd forgotten to bring my own bag when I'd gone shopping, I would just use one of theirs. Now, if I forget, I bring the trolley back to the car and I dump it all in the boot, and I go home and I get my own bags and I empty it. And that to me is the way I behave now.
I love that sentence for so many reasons, because it's inspirational and it was so British and it made me so happy.
What did I say?
That you took your groceries with the trolley and you put them in the boot, and it makes me so happy.
The supermarket trolley. That's what we do.
It's funny. I would have said we took them in the shopping cart and I put them in the trunk, which is very American.
Thank you for
No, that's
translating.
no, it's so great, but it's true. I mean, those little things are just they're so simple. And if you
Mm,
if you really think about the vastness of the issue, it's like why not? It's such an easy change. I'm looking at
mm.
this fact sheet that you guys have provided on the website for the film. Beverage bottles alone. This is crazy to me. Okay. According to the Container Recycling Institute, 100.7 billion plastic beverage bottles were sold in the US in 2014. That's 315 bottles per person.
Yes.
That's almost one a day for every single person in the country.
It's crazy, isn't it?
I mean, it's bananas. It's mental. Like I cannot believe that we are so incredibly wasteful here. I have to hope that a lot of that is being recycled. I have to hope, at least in the big cities, that people are being mindful of kind of putting those back. But the truth of the matter is, like you said, much of our recycling doesn't ever make it into recycling. And a lot of
No.
plastic isn't even recyclable, is it?
No, it's not. Although there are new methods, and one of the ones that we showed in the film was showing that every single type can now be recycled, but we don't have the facilities to deal with that now. We really don't.
Mm.
And actually, what I wouldn't want to happen is that everybody assumes, okay, we can keep turning it into more and more plastic, and that we carry on producing it exponentially because we'll never catch up with ourselves. It's got to be a behavioural
Oh yeah.
change and change in legislation as well, and to look at this recycling and this, turning it into fuel as a remedial thing, not as something that, becomes the norm and increases.
What is it like I mean, I know the UK is big, and it's hard to say like across the entire UK what the habits are or what the laws say. Here in the States, it varies wildly. I was born and raised in Texas. Growing up, there was no regard. I don't think there are any good protections even as I speak. Maybe somebody will write in to correct me, but when I'm back in
I hope they
Texas,
do.
there's definitely yeah. But definitely when I go home to visit my folks, there's still plastic bags everywhere, and there's it doesn't seem like there's a lot of cracking down. Now I live in Los Angeles. You can't get a plastic bag when you're at the grocery store, the convenience store. You have to either bring your own or you can get paper, and you have to pay for paper. Like there's like a 10-cent surcharge if you want paper bags, which I think is amazing. So it really varies greatly across the states how much the laws are starting to change to kind of take some of those decisions out of the consumer's hands. Is it the same in the UK?
It certainly varies, and it varies from shop to shop as well. I
Mm.
think our laws here are very weak on the new, certainly the charging for plastic bags, because you only have to charge if you have something like it's more than 250 employees in your shop, and
Hmm.
that's not a shop that's the same shop in different countries. That's per shop, as different countries,
Yeah.
different towns. It's per shop. Um, and what I found sometimes is that I've gone and I buy something and they say, "Would you like a bag?" And I say, "No, thanks." And they actually say to me, "It's okay, we're not charging for it." And I just say that
Yeah.
that's not the point. I don't want any more plastic. And they kind of go, "Oh, yes, yes, yes." So it's
Yeah, like
certainly still
they don't even
happening here. The
remember
law isn't
why the
strong enough.
legislation's.
No, no,
Yeah.
it's like, "Oh, don't worry, we won't charge you." Talk about missing the point. And the other thing is
Seriously.
microbeads. We're kind of slow to it. It's not a case of, right, we'll ban it now. It's like, oh, well, we'll ban it in a couple of years' time. Well, how many more millions of these things are going to go out through the
Yeah.
sewage system, straight into the ocean, simply because there's a delay on banning it because, these products are already out there. We're certainly slow here, and it's
Yeah, we are
frustrating.
too. It is frustrating. And like you said, even if the legislation hasn't caught up, we can be more mindful sooner. If people just know that when it says that there's a microbead in your face wash, that means there's a tiny little plastic, there are millions of tiny plastic beads that you're
Yes.
scrubbing your face with. Don't buy it.
No. I
just
always
don't
look at
buy
the
it.
labels now. But there was one that I bought recently because it said that it was pumice in there, which is obviously natural. And so I bought
Hmm.
it, got it home, and then read the label. And yes, there was pumice in there, but there was also little
Ugh.
polymers in there too. And I was so cross, so cross.
Yeah, and I think people don't know what the word polymer means. They don't know that
No,
that is
or
referring.
an acrylic as well. That's another one. So
Mm.
yeah, it needs to be labelled properly.
Yeah, and it's good that you are a big part of that educational effort that's being made, but um we need to see more of it, and not just in children, because it's a lot of adults that are the consumers,
Oh
and
yeah, I
there's a
mean
huge
yes, it's got to be
gap.
everyone. Yes,
Yeah,
I
we
mean children are fantastic ambassadors because they're so good at soaking up information, and parents will listen to children, and so will their
mhm.
peers. But it's not just a case. We don't have the luxury to wait until they've grown up and they're in positions of power that they can make those changes. Through legislation or developing technology, we don't have that luxury. So we've got to speak to everybody.
I want to ask, in making this film, because obviously, you guys traveled across the world and you went to, beautiful places, and you went to very sad places, and you saw
Mm,
beautiful things and you saw very sad things. What
mm.
was probably I don't know, your favorite part, your favorite message, the thing that was most compelling for you when you were sitting, spending hours in post trying to tell the story just right? I mean, it's probably hard for me to ask you, it's like, which of your children do you like the most? But was there anything in the film that really stood out to you that you were like, I'm really proud that that was included, or I'm so glad that we were able to tell that part of the story?
It's hard to call it a favourite one. There's two that stand out for me. One is Tuvalu, which we've already discussed. The other was the seabirds that we were filming. The
Hmm.
Lord Howe one, the one that you see being cut open when its stomach is so crammed with plastic. That to me was, if people see this and aren't moved to change their habits, then I don't really know what else we can do to get this message home, because you actually see it happening. And I mean, there are, in that sequence you can see 10 birds lined up. They were all the same. Obviously we only put one into the film, but there was another sequence which I think was very strong. But we already had the albatross in Midway and we already had the shearwaters in Lord Howe, but there's another shearwater that Jen's been studying that nests and breeds on small islands off Tasmania, and
Hmm.
it's the short-tailed shearwater, and they make their nests in these grassy hummocks, which are on the side of the island. And every year, the local Aboriginals have permission to harvest them, and they eat them. It's called mutton bird, and they will take a certain number of them. It's in magnitudes of 1 million, and they take the chicks that are about 80 to 90 days old, pull them out of the burrows, break the necks, and they go to a harvesting shed. And they go in at one end looking like a sort of a fluffy, twitching little chick, and they come out at the other end looking like an oven-ready chicken.
Hmm.
And for us, it was an opportunity to see what they'd been eating, because the gut bucket was on one side. So as they were taking the intestines out, they were throwing them away. And we were diving in there with both hands. It's lovely. Um, and the interesting point is that the parents of these birds have been radio tagged to see where they're going to pick up the food for their chicks. And they are all going straight down to the Antarctic polar front. So anything that those chicks are being fed is coming from Antarctic waters. And we opened 100 stomachs of those chicks, and 100 stomachs had plastic pre-production pellets in them, without
Ugh.
exception, every single one.
And these are the little, they look like little tiny stones that are melted down at the beginning of the life of
That's
a
right.
plastic object.
Yes. Yeah, they look like little rice grains. And of course, to fish and birds, they look like eggs. And
Yeah, they do.
so
They're
many of
like little
them are eaten.
whitish. Yeah.
Well,
Oh
yeah, not always
gosh.
white, depending. The recycled ones are actually black. And the longer
Mm.
they've been in the sea, the browner they become. But those particular little beads were used in a study that was done in San Diego. And the scientist, Dr. Chelsea Roshman, they were called virgin pellets, brand new plastic pellets, put them around the area in San Diego Bay where seafood is collected. And she looked at the chemicals that were building up on them from day one and daily for a week, and then weekly, and then monthly for a year. And she found from the day that those things go in the water, they start to attract these chemicals. And of course, by the end of the year, the magnitude of these chemicals was really quite incredible. And when you think that's the area where seafood is harvested from,
Wow.
it's frightening.
It really is. Oof.
Yes.
I'm doubling down now on the fact that I don't eat fish.
Oh.
I've never been a seafood lover, and it makes me sad because I know how healthy it could be, but it's just so many things about it scare me and kind of make me shudder. And I definitely don't want to eat it any more now than I did before. That's for sure.
Yes.
It's sad. It's scary. I mean, and this is just one of the many ways that we are really treating our oceans poorly. It's not just the plastic.
Yeah, I mean, who knows how bad it is now? I would like to think that seafood is at the moment safe to eat, perhaps if it's not something we're eating all the time. But at what point is it going to become hazardous for us to eat? I don't want to get to that point. And that's why I feel it's so important we address this.
Absolutely. It's already at a point where doctors, certain types of seafood doctors don't recommend that you eat it when you're pregnant.
Yes, exactly. Or more than once a week. But for some people, it's their main source of protein. They have no other choice.
Yeah. And it's a big part of their economy.
Yes, of course. We haven't even touched on that.
Yeah. But you know what? I do have to say one thing that I really loved about this documentary, and maybe this is a more superficial thing to say, it's beautiful. Even the things that are kind of harrowing are beautiful in that it's just the cinematography is so lovely and it's very fresh. And I really like the motion graphics and sort of the infographics in the documentary. They really help drive home a lot of points. And they're very graspable, and it's science communication, I think, at its best. I was really impressed when I was watching it, and I thought, wow, this is going to be really impactful for a lot of people.
We did have, the cameramen were wonderful. Some had worked on the Blue Planet series anyway. I've done a lot of work with underwater cameramen, so certainly all the cameramen that we used were fantastic. But also the science, we wanted to make sure that it was all backed up by peer-reviewed papers and so on. And the work that we're doing with scientists around the world, and certainly in the final edit to get those graphics, working with Brunel University in London, they have been so incredibly helpful, so informative, and breaking it down into a way that you don't need to be a scientist to understand it. And I think they did a fantastic job on that, as of course did the graphics people, interpreting it into something that you could see and understand.
Yeah.
We had a great team.
It really is incredible. And, in my experience as somebody who works kind of in the science communication field, and really as a skeptic and kind of a staunch evidence-based presenter, you mentioned before kind of conservation documentaries and how they can sort of rub people the wrong way. And I see them kind of falling into two camps. They're like the strong science and evidence-based yet compelling stories, and then there are some that can kind of get a little bit wooey. They can get a little crunchy granola, a little hippy dippy, and sometimes kind of stray from the science. And those do sort of worry me, and they rub me the wrong way a little bit. And I can absolutely say without a doubt that A Plastic Ocean is evidence based. The science is strong, and it's just a stunning film.
Oh, thank you so much. Means a lot. 8 years of my life has gone into this.
8 years. Wow. Well, how exciting must it be to see it? That's crazy. And so 8 years this month, it's going live for the world to see. Are you so excited?
I'm very pleased and relieved.
Well, I have to say, it has been so much fun chatting with you. I've learned a lot. I've learned even more than I learned watching the film. Hopefully we've gotten people excited about the film. But before we go, I do a little thing at the end of my podcast where I ask every guest to answer 2 questions. And I was wondering if you would like to play along and answer those same 2 questions.
I hope I can answer them.
You can. They're very open-ended, but they're also big picture, so you might hate me after I ask you, but let's go with it. All right, so the first question is, when you think about the future, in whatever context, is important to you, whether it's a personal future or whether it's kind of the future of the planet, the future of the globe, the future of humanity, what is the thing, A, that, concerns you the most, that keeps you up the most at night, that you're most worried about? And then on the flip side of that, the second question, to kind of end on a more positive note, what are you most hopeful and optimistic and excited about?
Are we sticking to the subject?
We don't have to.
Okay, it's easier to answer if we do. The thing that concerns me the most, the thing that concerns me the most is that people will completely lose their connection with nature. And we see children now staring at little screens and not getting out there and enjoying it. And I think that the majority of people on this planet don't realize that the ocean provides more than half the oxygen we breathe and absorbs most of the carbon dioxide. People still think that the rainforests are the lungs of the planet, and they are, but the ocean is a much, much bigger lung, and we absolutely depend on it for our very existence. So even if you live right in the center of America or wherever, and you're a long way from the ocean and you don't even get to go and see it, you are still depending on it. And if we lose that connection, then we really are in trouble. And if we treat it as something that you visit on holiday and that's that, and it doesn't really matter if it changes, then that's something to be very concerned about. And to go to the question B, my hope is that in the future, well, certainly my grandchildren will know and love the ocean as much as I do, and that they will be able to enjoy it and enjoy the wildlife in there and have the same opportunities that I've had, because it will thrive. And I wasn't a grandmother when I started working on this, and I now have 4 grandchildren. And as each one's come along, I've been even more determined that this is going to be successful, that this word will get out there, and that they live in Cornwall, so they're right on the beach, and I look at them with sandcastles, and they're decorating them quite often with bits of plastic as well as seashells. And I don't want that for their future. I don't want every time we go to the beach, we've got to clean up a space to go and sit down. I want it to be as it was for them and for their children. And one of the first conferences I went to working on this was the Marine Debris Conference, which was held in Hawaii. And what was fantastic about the people of Hawaii, the people that have always lived there, is that whatever they do in life, they consider 7 generations beyond their own. Now, wouldn't the world be an amazing place if we all thought like that? If everything we did, we look at how it's going to affect 7 generations from now, we wouldn't be in this mess.
Absolutely. Gosh, even if we thought about 2 generations, we wouldn't be in this mess.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and it's definitely something to aspire to. And there's no reason we can't do that. There's no reason we can't think about our impact every time we make a decision. It's just about being a little bit more mindful. It's about stopping, suppressing those impulses, and just asking ourselves, why am I doing this? Is it worth it? What is the outcome of it? Do I need this right now? How will it affect things down the road? It's not second nature, but it can become second nature with practice, I think.
It can be. And if our health is at stake, why are we not doing this now? We know now. Let's do something.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, A Plastic Ocean is going to be available January 20th online. You can visit plasticoceans.org and you can download it right there, can't you?
You can stream it. You'll be able to download it eventually, but right from the start, you will be able to watch it.
Nice. And there's so much more that you can do there at the website. You can learn about the film, but you can also take action. You can contribute to the cause, and you can see all of the things that you can do in your life to help affect change. All right. Well, Jo, I got to ask you, are you active on social media? If people want to say hello, if they want to say they saw the film and they were excited by it, is there any place where people can reach out and say hello?
Yes, well, I do have a Twitter account, which is at Jo Ruxton, but also obviously we have a Plastic Oceans one. If people want to contact us, they can do so. Information on the website, and we will see those letters. And also on Facebook, if people send messages, it will reach us.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Well, everybody, I hope that you enjoy the film as much as I did. And Jo, thank you so much for taking time to chat with me today.
Cara, thank you so much for your interest in this and for taking it to another level. It's people like you that have kept us going. Really, we need more.
Well, I mean, it was just wonderful. All I did was watch it, but it really profoundly affected me. So I thought it was important enough to chat about it. And hey, guys, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.